On your knees, pet. Make them laugh. Rex Maddox's voice carried like gravel in a tin can, loud enough to snap 300 conversations in half. The cafeteria yard at Riverside Correctional froze. Trays hovered midair. A gull wheeled above the razor wire, squealing against the dry Northern California heat. The newcomer, thin prison khakis, wrists mottled with old bruises, did not resist when Maddox's palm found the back of his skull and pushed down. His cheek met concrete, warm and dusty, flecked with the day's slop. Phones rose in a ragged halo around them, contraband lenses winking as Maddox's crew opened their livestream and the comments began to crawl. The newcomer's breathing stayed low and even, not the panting Maddox's boys were used to. He blinked once. A shard of mica in the concrete caught the sun and stabbed his eye with white. He kept still. A leather collar, cracked and stained, dangled from Maddox's fist. "Showtime," the gang leader said, turning for the cameras with a smile that never reached his eyes. He looked like a high school linebacker who'd kept growing after the game ended. A neck too thick for his collar. A dome of shaved scalp wrinkling into a scowl. Hard lines of ink cut across his forearms, thunderbolts, skulls. A coded menagerie of hatred and a patch of barbed wire crawled up his throat. He snapped the collar around the newcomer's neck, tugged once to hear the metal ring sing. "Bark," he ordered. Laughter rippled, mean and hungry. Someone somewhere dropped a spoon, and the clang jittered around the cinderblock walls. "Give our subscribers what they paid for," Maddox said, pivoting the phone so the audience could drink the spectacle. The yard smelled of boiled potatoes and bleach and men packed too tight together. A distant radio bled a baseball score through static. Heat trembled above the yard like invisible flame. The newcomer rose to his hands and knees. A bead of sweat tracked from his hairline along his cheekbone and paused on his jaw, reluctant to fall. His face was calm, almost serene. But if anyone had looked close, they might have noticed the tiny tremor in his left wrist. A vibration that wasn't fear so much as control held under tension. He crawled forward. Phones moved with him, predators stalking. "Slower," Maddox said, jerking the collar. "Make them savor it." The newcomer complied. The ring of steel on concrete from the dropped spoon had unlocked a door far from this yard. Somewhere else, lights were brighter and the air smelled of canvas and sweat and antiseptic. The bell had sounded and a man had fallen. Not now, not here. He blinked again and the door shut. He lowered his gaze to the ground and counted his breath. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. He had learned the cadence the way a man learns the streets in a dangerous neighborhood. One wrong turn and you don't come home. Maddox stepped in front of him and kicked a tray sideways with his boot. Mashed potatoes skidded like gray snow. "Eat," he said. "No hands." The newcomer bent and took a mouthful. The taste was salt and cardboard, but he made his face empty. A ripple of disgusted cheers rolled around the ring of men. A few older inmates looked away, shame flaring in their eyes, before they remembered the rules of survival, and straightened their faces. The younger ones called out for tricks. "Roll over. Play dead." Maddox tugged. "You heard him. Dead." The newcomer let his chest sag and lay still. A chorus of laughter crested and broke. For a heartbeat, the yard seemed to tilt and slide, as if the concrete had been greased. The men's faces blurred into a wall of mouths. The phones became eyes without lids. When the world steadied, the newcomer lifted his head an inch. On his wrist, a cheap black watch with a cracked crystal showed a stopped second hand at the 30 mark. Frozen there as if time itself had been arrested, interrogated, and thrown in the hole. He touched the watch to the ground for balance as he rose to his knees. And anyone with a veteran's eye might have seen it then. The imperceptible shift of weight into the outside edge of his foot, the knee angle, the placement of shoulders over hips, nothing flashy, nothing a bully would read, but a stance that came from long practice long ago. Maddox's eyes narrowed, not with recognition but with the primitive feeling a man gets when the wind changes in the woods. He frowned and shoved harder. "Face in the bucket," he said, hooking a toe under the galvanized pail they kept for mop water and pulling it close. The liquid inside was the color of weak coffee. The newcomer bent. His reflection wobbled on the surface. A brown face, a small scar by the left eye, a jaw set like a vice. "Don't fight. Not yet." Not until the truth is watching. The thought came without sound, like a hand on his shoulder. He inhaled and tasted bleach ghosts and old soap. The collar cinched. He went under quick and came up smoother, coughing once, letting the water string from his chin so it caught the sun and turned to gold. "Smile," Maddox said. "Say you're my dog." The newcomer's voice was steady when he answered, almost conversational, the kind of tone a man uses when he tells you the time. "I'm nobody." More laughter, but thinner now. The cameras peered closer. The newcomer sat back on his heels. He looked at Maddox as if he were resolving a shape on the horizon. A puzzle to be solved by patience. The leader's grin faltered at the edges. "Crawl," Maddox said again, louder, and the crew around him barked. The newcomer obeyed, but the rhythm had changed. His palms found the same cracks in the concrete as before. His knees fell into the same shallow divots. He moved as if reading the yard. Line by line. Like a book. A man had once loved and then forgotten, and found again in a thrift store with someone else's name written inside the cover. He circled a table. The inmates at it leaned back to give space, eyes sliding sideways to avoid trouble, hands bracketing plastic cups of instant coffee that tasted like burnt paper. "Look at me," Maddox demanded. The newcomer lifted his gaze and held it. The moment stretched. Somewhere beyond the fence a siren wailed and dwindled. A guard on the catwalk cleared his throat and looked away. A gull landed on the chain-link crown and shuffled like a fat uncle at a wedding. The yard breathed. The newcomer looked away first, not in submission, but with the courtesy a man offers a child during a tantrum. "Stand," Maddox snapped. He yanked up on the collar. The newcomer rose. The collar came loose and fell to the ground with a soft clack, a domestic sound, like a belt set gently on a chair. "Pick it up," Maddox said. The newcomer looked at the leather and then at the cameras, and then at the men who would watch this later from a couch in a dark room, alone, or from a bar stool, laughing too loud. He bent, picked up the collar, and placed it in Maddox's hand with the same care he might have used to pass his mother a fragile plate. Then he put his hands behind his head and waited. The yard drew a collective breath. "You think you're funny?" Maddox asked, too calm. His crew spread, a fan of muscle and ink. "You think you're safe because you play tricks? I own this yard. I own you." The newcomer said nothing. On his wrist the second hand on the broken watch vibrated against the hour marker, a tiny insect beating wings against glass. "In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 6. He looked past Maddox to where the yard ended and the cinderblock wall began. To a hairline crack that ran from the corner of a vent down to a scuffed patch where men leaned and smoked when the guards forgot to watch. He thought of a different wall, pale tape marking a cage, a man across from him with fear in his eyes and pride in his jaw, and the way the world can go quiet right before it explodes. "Not now, not yet." The muttering started at the edges. A young inmate with a spiderweb tattoo on his neck said, "Yo, he ain't right." Another answered, "He's right enough." A third said nothing and crossed himself. The older ones measured the calculus of interference and stepped back into the sum of their years. "Kiss the concrete," Maddox said at last, needing a laugh to prove the world still worked. The newcomer lowered, pressed his lips to the warm gritty surface, and rose. "Cheers." The spell broke. The phones bobbed, satisfied. Someone shouted for more, for worse. Maddox rolled his shoulders and stepped into the newcomer's space until their breaths touched. Up close, the leader's eyes were the cold blue of a winter sky above a frozen lake. He smiled again, obliged the cameras with a last shove, and turned away as if signaling a curtain drop. The circle opened, sound returned, trays clattered. A gull laughed like a broken hinge. The newcomer walked to the nearest table, picked up a fallen cup, set it upright, and wiped his mouth on the back of his hand. He straightened and the motion let his shirt ride up enough to show the top curl of a tattoo on his back, black lines like flames climbing a tower. A man at the next table squinted, and then thought better than to name what he thought he saw. The newcomer adjusted his shirt and Saturday. A guard passed close, eyes sliding over him like rain over wax, and kept walking. "What they call you?" someone asked from the shadow of the soda machine, a voice like sandpaper, not friendly, not hostile, just curious enough to risk it. The newcomer looked down at his tray. The potatoes had formed a small hill with a crater in the center. He took a bite. chewed, swallowed. He lifted his gaze. Let it rest where the collar lay coiled in Maddox's palm like a sleeping snake. Nobody. He said again, and the word fit in his mouth like a name he had worn before and left on a hook by the door. He turned his wrist a fraction as if to check the time, and saw the second hand still caught at 30, as if the watch were waiting for a signal only he could hear. Far away, in a room with carpet that muffled footsteps and a clock that ran true, a woman with steady eyes would later ask in a voice meant to settle storm water, "How are you holding up?" And his answer would be what it always was. He walks in silence. For now the heat pressed down, the concrete breathed warmth back into the sky, and the yard resumed its grim choreography. Maddox's laugh rode the air, rehearsed and satisfied. The newcomer finished his meal and stood. Disposal of tray as precise as a ritual. He moved like a man who knew the value of each step in a place where steps could cost you. At the edge of the yard he paused, looked once over his shoulder, and met Maddox's gaze across the distance. No challenge. No plea. Just a line drawn softly in dust, so faint a breeze could erase it, so sure a storm couldn't. Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd of khaki, and the phones lowered, and the day rolled forward on squeaking wheels. The night inside Riverside Correctional smelled of rust and rainless dust. After lights out, the hum of the fluorescent tubes faded into the background throb of 1,000 breaths. Each one measured against the ticking of distant pipes. In cell 3B11, the newcomer lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling where shadows of the bars drew faint crosshatches over his face. The red mark from the collar still burned on his neck, but his pulse was slow, steady. Somewhere down the tier, a man cried quietly into his pillow. Somewhere else, laughter rose from a card game. He listened to both the way a man listens to a metronome. Steady, predictable, safe. He turned his wrist. The cheap watch with its cracked glass stared back, its frozen second hand still caught at 30. He touched it gently, like checking a wound that never healed. The moment his thumb brushed the face, the hum of the prison dissolved, and another sound flooded in: the sharp ring of a bell, the echo of a cage door slamming open, the roar of a crowd. 4 years earlier, he had walked into an octagon under white lights, gloves strapped so tight they cut the blood from his fingers. The canvas smelled of antiseptic and adrenaline. Across from him, his opponent smiled, the kind of smile that says everything's business until it's personal. He remembered the last words his trainer whispered through the fence. "Keep it clean, Dante. You don't have to prove anything tonight." But he had, because the voice of doubt in his head was louder than any crowd. It whispered about failure, about what people said behind closed doors: a washed-up fighter, a man who couldn't finish, a man who was all defense and no fire. He had fought like a storm trying to erase itself. The punch came in the third round, a perfect counter. He didn't even feel land. The man dropped as if pulled by gravity alone, eyes blank, mouth open. Silence swallowed the arena. The referee waved his arms, and the medics rushed in. Dante stood there, unable to breathe, staring at the body that refused to move. When the stretcher rolled past, he saw the man's eyes flicker once, then still. Later, the reporters called it a freak accident. He called it murder. He quit the sport that night. The belts, the sponsors, the fame, none of it mattered when he couldn't close his eyes without hearing that sound, that sudden quiet after a life ends. For months he wandered, working in a gym in Oakland, teaching kids how not to fight unless they had to. He rented a room above a laundromat and drank coffee from the same chipped mug every morning. The city around him pulsed with noise, sirens, traffic, people, but inside he carried the hush of that cage. Then one evening, as the rain drew silver lines down the window, 2 men in dark suits came through the gym door. They didn't look like boxers. One flashed a badge. The other said his name: Special Agent Harlan Pierce, FBI. "We know what happened in the ring," Pierce had said, sitting across from him at a folding table. "And we know it wasn't your fault." Dante didn't answer. The agent slid a file across the table. Inside were photos, bags of white powder, coded invoices, prison transfer papers. At the bottom, a name: Rex Maddox. "He's not just a racist thug," Pierce said. "He's running product for a network that reaches half the state. We've been trying to get inside for 2 years. We need someone who can handle himself. Someone who can keep calm under pressure. Dante had laughed, dry and bitter. You're asking a fighter to go to prison voluntarily. I'm asking a man to make what happened mean something, Pierce corrected. You'd be protected. A cover identity. Quiet release after 6 months. No one would ever know. Dante had stared at the photos until the faces blurred. A chance at redemption? Or another fight wearing a different costume? He asked one question. If I go in, and it gets ugly, how do I get out? There'll be someone inside. Pierce said. A psychologist named Dr. Sarah Carter. She'll check on you once a week under the guise of therapy sessions. If you ever need extraction, use the phrase, "The ghost walks no more." She'll handle the rest. Dante had signed. Now, in Riverside, that promise felt far away. Like something made to another man in another lifetime. The watch on his wrist had stopped the moment he crossed the prison gate, as if even time refused to follow him inside. He turned onto his side, the thin mattress creaking. Carlos Mendez, his cellmate, snored softly on the lower bunk. The man was built like a boulder but moved with the weary caution of someone who'd seen too many explosions. He had the calm of soldiers who measure every sound before they react. Earlier that evening, Carlos had said nothing during the humiliation in the yard. But later, when they'd been locked in, he'd looked up from his cot and said, "You don't breathe like the rest of us." Dante had smiled faintly. "How's that?" "You count," Carlos said. Like a man trying to keep the demons lined up. Dante hadn't answered. Now, as the prison settled into its night rhythm, he whispered, "Maybe I am." The next morning arrived in clanging metal and shouted orders. The air smelled of instant coffee and disinfectant. Breakfast was powdered eggs, gray toast, and a banana spotted brown. Dante took his tray, found a seat near the back, and ate quietly. Across the room, Maddox's crew gathered at their usual table, talking loud enough for everyone to hear. Maddox's laugh carried over the hum, sharp as broken glass. The bruise on Dante's jaw had already darkened, but his eyes were clear. When Maddox's gaze found him, he didn't look away. For a long second, something wordless passed between them, curiosity, maybe, or the first flicker of unease. Then Maddox smirked and went back to his meal. After breakfast came laundry duty. Dante worked beside Carlos in the steam-filled room, folding sheets that smelled faintly of bleach. The heat made the walls sweat. Carlos spoke in a low voice. "I saw what you did yesterday. Not the crawling part, the way you stood up." "Yeah? You've been trained. I've seen that stance in the Corps. You don't fool me." Dante kept folding. "I'm just trying to survive like everyone else." "Nah," Carlos said. "The rest of us survive by bowing. You survive by waiting." He wiped his brow. "Whatever you're waiting for, you better make it worth it." Dante didn't respond. But inside, a pulse of memory stirred the folder with Maddox's name. The photos of bodies dumped near highways. The victims who never had a chance to fight back. That was what he was waiting for. Justice, quiet and heavy, patient as breath. That night, during recreation hour, he spotted Dr. Sarah Carter for the first time. She stood by the counseling office window, clipboard in hand, her dark hair pulled tight. She moved like someone who'd seen too much violence to flinch anymore. When their eyes met, she gave the smallest nod, a signal rehearsed in a world outside these walls. Later, during the session, she spoke softly, like any prison therapist making small talk. "How are you adjusting, Mr. Barnes?" Using the fake name the bureau had given him. "Fine," he said. "You sleep?" "Enough." She scribbled something, then asked. "And the anger?" "Under control." Her pen paused. "You've always been good at control, haven't you?" He didn't answer. After a silence, she closed the folder. "The bureau received your first update. Keep your head down. Maddox's people are getting bolder. There's talk of a shipment moving through the laundry next week." "Noted," he said. She rose, offered him a small smile meant to pass for professionalism. "Remember the phrase if you need it. The ghost walks no more," he repeated quietly. "Let's hope you don't have to use it," she said. When she left, the door clicked shut behind her. And for the first time since his arrival, he felt the faint tremor of something alive inside him, a spark of purpose. In his cell that night, he touched the watch again. It was still stuck at 30, but for a moment he imagined he heard it tick. A single faint click under his thumb. He smiled to himself, just a shadow of one, and whispered into the dark. Not yet. But soon. By the third week, Riverside began to breathe around Dante like a living thing. The routine settled over him. The clang of doors at dawn. The roll call echoing down the concrete corridor. The smell of powdered soap and metal trays. The first sting of humiliation had faded into the rhythm of survival. Men forgot fast in here. What had been spectacle became background noise. Yet he could feel eyes still tracking him, testing, waiting for the next reaction. Maddox hadn't touched him again. But his presence carried through the yard like static before a storm. Every laugh that followed Dante through the corridor carried Maddox's signature mocking, territorial. A reminder that power here was a performance. But beneath the surface, other currents moved. Carlos noticed it first. "You feel that?" he murmured one morning while loading linen carts. Dante didn't answer. The guards look the other way too often now. Maddox's crew moves around like they own the place. He nodded toward the loading dock, where two inmates stacked crates labeled cleaning supplies. A guard signed the manifest without checking a thing. "That's how stuff gets in," Carlos said. "And out." Dante tucked the information away. He'd spent enough time around fighters to know when a man was bluffing. Maddox wasn't bluffing. He had reached beyond these walls. During lunch, Dante watched from the edge of the cafeteria as Maddox's men passed a small packet folded in plastic wrap to a kitchen worker. A quick handshake, an exchange of nods, and it was gone. Drugs, most likely. But it was the ease of it that chilled him, the confidence of people who knew they were untouchable. That night, Dante replayed the movement in his head. Timing, spacing, the rhythm of corruption. Every pattern had a flaw. You just had to wait for it to reveal itself. The next day, the warden announced a mandatory counseling session for several inmates, part of what he called rehabilitation transparency. Dante's name was on the list, along with two of Maddox's men. It was a strange pairing, one that made the hair on his arms lift. When he entered the counseling office, Dr. Carter looked up briefly before lowering her gaze to the papers. "Please sit," she said, voice neutral. The two gang members lounged opposite her, one of them smirking. Dante took a seat near the door. Carter began asking routine questions about anger management and adjustment. The men answered with sarcasm, snickers, half-truths. Dante stayed quiet. But when she asked him how he dealt with conflict, he said simply, "I wait for the noise to stop." The bigger of the two gang members, Vince, with a scar running from ear to chin, laughed. "You won't be waiting long then, Barnes. Noise never stops in here." His friend elbowed him. "Unless someone shuts it off for good." "Doctor." Carter's pen didn't pause, but Dante saw the flicker in her eyes. She dismissed them early. When the door closed, she said under her breath, "They're testing you. Maddox's people think you're competition. If they find out who you are, I can't protect you." Dante smiled faintly. "I'm not here to be protected." "Then at least don't die before we have evidence," she replied. 2 nights later, the tension snapped. During evening recreation, the lights flickered once, twice, then died. The yard went black except for the floodlights by the guard tower. Shouts erupted. In the confusion, someone lunged at Dante from behind. He pivoted on instinct, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting just enough to redirect the knife. The blade clattered to the ground. Another shape emerged from the dark, swinging a chain. Dante sidestepped, elbowed the man in the ribs, and pushed him down. The entire exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, but by the time the lights returned, both attackers were on the ground, groaning. A guard whistle blew, and bodies scattered like pigeons. Later, in the infirmary, Carter appeared again, pretending to check his vitals. "Self-defense," she said quietly. "But you made it look easy. Too easy." "I reacted," he said. "Next time don't," she warned. "They're looking for an excuse to isolate you permanently." "Let them," Dante said. "The quieter it gets, the better I can hear what's moving underneath." She frowned but said nothing more. Word spread fast. The story changed with each retelling. Some said Dante had broken both men's arms. Others said he'd disarmed 3 attackers barehanded. By morning, His nickname had begun to surface in whispers. The Ghost. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had tried to bury that name, yet it followed him here, as if the past refused to stay silent. Even Maddox heard it. At breakfast, the leader's blue eyes found him across the hall. A slow smile spread across his face, not amused but calculating. "Ghost," he said loudly, tasting the word. "That what they call you? Cute." His crew laughed, but the sound was strained. Dante said nothing, just finished his meal, and stood. The message was clear. Maddox knew now that this was no ordinary inmate. The next few days turned uneasy. Maddox's men watched him constantly, but none approached. Even the guards seemed uncertain, whispering in corners. Dante used the time to map the laundry routes, noting which carts left unsupervised, which guards signed false forms. It all pointed to one pattern. Maddox controlled the movement of goods through the cleaning department. It was the perfect cover. He only needed proof. On Thursday night, while others slept, Dante wrote small notes on scraps torn from paper bags, using a stub of pencil smuggled from the library. Times, names, door numbers. He hid them under the mattress lining. Each detail mattered. Carlos woke mid-note and watched quietly. "You planning an escape?" "Something like that," Dante said. "Then take me with you." "Not this kind," Dante replied. Carlos studied him a moment. "You're working for someone, aren't you?" When Dante didn't answer, Carlos sighed. "Don't worry. I've been in wars where nobody said the truth out loud. Just tell me if you need backup." Dante looked at him, the flicker of respect passing between soldiers who recognized each other by silence. The next afternoon, the laundry supervisor, a guard named Holbrook, approached Maddox in the yard, whispering something too low to hear. A small nod from Maddox followed. Dante felt it, the shift in air. Whatever was coming. It was planned. That evening, Holbrook reassigned Dante to night laundry detail. Alone. Carter's warning echoed in his head. But he accepted. When the shift began, he noticed new crates stacked near the back wall. The labels were wrong: industrial soap from a supplier that had been defunct for months. He pried one open slightly. Inside, beneath layers of detergent, packets of white powder gleamed in the dim light. He didn't have time to react before a voice came from behind. "Curiosity kills. Ghost." Maddox stepped out of the shadow, the scarlet glow of his cigarette tip flaring. "But I guess you already know that." He motioned, and two of his men closed the door behind them. "You really should have stayed." Nobody. Dante felt his pulse slow instead of race. "In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 6. I'm not the one afraid of being seen," he said. Maddox laughed softly. "Afraid? No. I just prefer my business quiet." He flicked the cigarette toward the floor, the ember scattering. "You've been busy. Talking to people you shouldn't. Asking questions." "Just folding sheets," Dante said. "Sure," Maddox said. "And I'm the Pope." He stepped closer. "Here's the deal, Ghost. You're gonna take the fall for this little stash. Guards'll find it in your bunk tomorrow. You'll get solitary, maybe worse. Me? I'll go back to running my empire." He leaned close, his breath hot. "Any last words?" Dante's gaze shifted to the crates, then to the small vent above them. He memorized every inch. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Not yet." Maddox frowned. "What?" But before he could react, the whistle of a night patrol echoed outside the door. Maddox cursed, signaling his men. Later, he growled, slipping back into the dark. When the guard entered moments later, the room was empty except for Dante, standing by the open crate, face calm. "Inspection," he said simply. The guard glanced around, suspicious, but left. As the door closed, Dante exhaled slowly, pressing his thumb against the cracked watch. For the first time since he'd entered Riverside, the second hand twitched forward. 1:31. The Ghost was awake. The next morning broke hard and bright, the kind of California sun that made the walls of Riverside Correctional glow like Killine-fired clay. The smell of disinfectant couldn't hide the tension that buzzed through the corridors. Dante moved through breakfast like a shadow, quiet, aware. Maddox's men were scattered, whispering more than usual. Even the guards seemed restless. Something was coming. By noon, he knew what. Word spread across the yard. Dogfight Night. It was an old prison ritual, illegal, savage, and tolerated because it kept tempers from exploding elsewhere. Maddox had organized it before, turning violence into theater. 2 inmates enter, the crowd ringside, guards conveniently missing. Tonight, the name on the betting sheet wasn't a surprise. Nobody. Maddox had written it himself. Dante's cellmate Carlos looked at him across the metal table at dinner. "You know this is a setup," he said. "You win, you die later. You lose, you die now." Dante's eyes stayed on his tray. "It's not about winning," he said. "It's about what comes after." Carlos exhaled, shaking his head. "You got a plan, Ghost?" "Something like that." He glanced at the clock. The hands moved this time. At dusk, the guards performed their usual checks, then vanished. The yard emptied except for a ring of men forming around a patch of bare concrete. The floodlights flickered to life, humming, drawing moths. Maddox stood in the center like a ringmaster, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the tattoo on his throat glinting with sweat. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out. "Tonight's entertainment, our quiet friend who don't know how to bark." Laughter rippled through the crowd. His voice turned darker. "And his dance partner Tommy Bulldog Smith." Bulldog lumbered forward, thick-necked, shoulders like slabs of stone, a grin split wide under a broken nose. His fists were wrapped in tape darkened with sweat. Maddox clapped him on the shoulder. "No killing unless it's funny," he said. Loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd roared. Dante stepped into the ring. The air felt heavier here, charged. He could taste metal in his mouth. The same taste from every fight he'd ever been in. That edge where fear and focus met. His hands hung loose, fingers twitching with muscle memory. Bulldog cracked his knuckles. "You sure you don't want to beg first, nobody?" Dante didn't answer. Maddox grinned. "Begin." Bulldog lunged, swinging a wild hook meant to end it early. Dante stepped aside, just a whisper of motion, his body turning with the wind. The punch missed by an inch, the air rushing past his ear. Bulldog came again. Faster this time. Another hook. Another miss. The crowd jeered. Dante's movements were smooth, too smooth for a man supposedly untrained. He wasn't fighting, he was measuring. Maddox watched, his grin tightening. "Hit him." Bulldog charged again. Dante ducked, pivoted, his elbow brushed Bulldog's ribs. The man stumbled, surprised by the precision. For a moment they circled. The noise of the yard faded to a heartbeat. The floodlights cast long shadows that swayed like ghosts. Bulldog feinted left, drew back his arm. A glint of metal flashed, a sharpened spoon handle clutched tight in his fist. Dante saw it, registered, moved. The world slowed. He shifted weight to the outside foot, angled the body, grabbed the wrist. One motion, small, controlled. The blade fell, clattering. His open palm struck Bulldog's temple with the softness of a whisper. The man dropped like a tree felled in slow motion, eyes rolling back. Silence slammed down. For one long breath, no one moved. Then murmurs. "He didn't even hit him hard. He's dead." "No, he's breathing." What the hell was that? Phones rose again, lenses blinking like a swarm of mechanical eyes. Someone shouted, "That's the ghost." Maddox froze, the word hitting him like a slap. He stepped forward, fury building, but before he could speak, Bulldog groaned and rolled onto his side. Alive but finished. Dante stood still, chest rising slowly. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't even looking at them. He stared at the horizon beyond the fence, where the sun had melted into a streak of copper. Maddox broke the silence, laughing too loud. "Looks like our boys got some moves. Don't worry, fellas, I'll post this for all you patriots watching at home. Monkey beats the dog." The laughter that followed was strained, uneasy. Later that night, the video hit the outside world. Uploaded by Maddox's men, it spread through dark channels first, then leaked to the mainstream. By morning, millions had seen it. The clip was short, edited. A black inmate attacking a white man, the sound of the crowd cheering. Then a cut to Bulldog unconscious. The part with the knife was gone. The headlines wrote themselves: "Ex-fighter goes rogue in prison. Self-defense, or savagery?" On TV screens in the guard lounge, pundits argued while footage looped endlessly. Dante was pulled from his cell before dawn. Solitary. The walls were closer here, the light harsher. He sat on the floor, hands resting on his knees, breathing evenly. They had taken the watch. He missed its silent weight. Hours passed without measure. When the door finally opened, Dr. Carter entered, flanked by a guard. Her expression was tight. "It's everywhere," she said. "Maddox's people cut the footage. The Bureau can't intervene yet without exposing you." "How bad?" he asked. "They're calling for an investigation. You're painted as the aggressor." She crouched, voice low. "You can't react. Not now. We need them to feel safe again, to slip." Dante's gaze was distant. "They already have." The following week crawled by. The prison buzzed with rumors, reporters parked outside the gates, and Maddox strutted like a man who had just inherited the world. He gave interviews through his lawyer, describing himself as a peacekeeper trying to reform violent inmates. Dante's name, his fake one, was splashed across the news. Then came the visit from Agent Pierce. It was late evening when two guards escorted a plain-suited man into solitary. Pierce looked older, wearier. "Hell of a mess you made," he said. But there was no heat in it. "The Bureau's monitoring the chatter. Maddox's network is spooked. He's moving the next shipment sooner." "You did your job, Ghost." Dante's jaw clenched. "I exposed myself." "You exposed him," Pierce corrected. "We'll clean the rest." "And the kid he almost killed tonight?" Dante said. "Bulldog was a pawn. He'll live." Pierce hesitated, then added. "We have a plan. Tomorrow, Carter's going to request a private session. You'll wear the wire again. Get Maddox talking. We'll intercept the shipment and wrap this up." Dante nodded, but his gut twisted. Maddox wasn't the kind of man to confess. He was the kind to burn everything down first. When the lights went out that night, Dante lay awake. He thought of the watch sitting in evidence, its second hand frozen mid-step. He thought of the boy he'd been in that ring years ago, the one who'd swung too hard. He thought of silence, and what it cost. "Not yet," he whispered. But soon. The next day arrived gray and heavy. Carter met him in the counseling room, eyes shadowed by lack of sleep. She placed a folder on the desk and said aloud for the cameras. "Progress evaluation. Inmate Barnes." Then, under her breath, "They're watching. Keep your answers short." He nodded. She asked, "Do you feel remorse for the incident?" "Yes," he said. "What have you learned?" "That people see what they want." Her eyes flicked up approval, faint and fast. Then the door opened. Maddox walked in, smiling like a man invited to a party. "Doctor," he said smoothly, "mind if I borrow our friend? I've got a message for him." Carter stiffened. "This is a private session. Warden's orders," Maddox said, waving a folded note. "Just 5 minutes." The guard hesitated, then left them. Maddox sat across from Dante, his grin venomous. "You cost me a good soldier, Ghost. So here's how this ends. Tonight, I take back control. You're going to the infirmary for evaluation. And something unfortunate will happen there. You get it?" Dante met his eyes. "You're sloppy when you're scared." Maddox's smile twitched. "You think you've got friends out there? You think anyone cares what happens in this hole?" He leaned in close. "Nobody's watching." That was when Carter's voice cut through, quiet but firm. "That's not true." Maddox turned, startled. She'd raised her pen slightly. A faint red light blinked at the tip. He realized too late. Dante's gaze never wavered. "You were saying, Rex?" Maddox's face blanched. "You." He lunged. But guards burst through the door, tackling him to the floor. Carter stayed composed, reciting procedure into her recorder. Suspect made verbal threats confirming intent to commit murder within facility. Maddox's curses echoed down the hall as they dragged him away. Dante sat back, slow breath filling his chest. The noise faded until all he could hear was the beat of his heart. The watch wasn't on his wrist, but he swore he could feel it ticking again. 31 seconds. Justice. One breath closer. The sound of the courtroom was unlike the yard, no metal doors slamming. No chains scraping against concrete. Just the faint whir of an air conditioner, and the shuffle of people pretending not to look too curious. It had been 3 months since Dogfight Night, and the world outside had devoured the story. Cable hosts replayed the footage until it became myth. To half the country, Dante Williams still officially, Michael Barnes was a monster in khaki. To the rest, he was a question mark. Now he sat in a dark suit borrowed from the bureau, wrists free for the first time in months, under the sterile glow of fluorescent light. The trial had drawn everyone. Reporters from Los Angeles, bloggers from Atlanta, retired boxers who remembered his real name. Rex Maddox sat 20 feet away, still bulky but deflated. His arrogance worn thin. His lawyer, Rebecca Cross, adjusted her red jacket and whispered into his ear. Maddox's smirk twitched like a bad habit. "He's smiling," Dante murmured to Agent Pierce beside him. "He thinks this is another show." Pierce didn't look up from his notes. "Let him think that. The real show starts when you speak." The judge entered, a woman in her 60s, with a silver bun, and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed. "Court is in session," she said. The bailiff's voice echoed. Cameras flashed once before being scolded into silence. Cross rose first, confident. "Your Honor, this case is about a violent inmate who attacked an unarmed man during an illegal fight he himself provoked. The defense will show that my client, Mr. Maddox, tried to stop it." The words dripped with artificial righteousness. Then came the edited video, displayed on a large screen. The crowd watched the same distorted clip, Dante's palm connecting, bulldog collapsing. Cut, freeze, zoom. No knife, no threat, just implication. Cross turned to the jury, her voice soft. "They called him the ghost. Tell me, does a ghost know mercy?" Dante stayed still, his pulse steady. He had learned not to flinch in cages or courtrooms. When his turn came, his lawyer, a bureau operative under civilian disguise, rose and requested permission to present a separate recording. The judge arched an eyebrow. "New evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." A 28-second clip, recovered from an internal surveillance system, previously deleted. Murmurs rippled through the room. The screen went dark, then flickered back to life. This time, the sound was clearer, the perspective from a high corner of the yard. The frame showed the gleam of a sharpened spoon handle in Bulldog's hand, the lunge, and Dante's swift, precise disarm. Then, just before the end, Maddox's voice off camera. "Use the blade. Make it look clean." The courtroom froze. Cross shot to her feet. "Objection. Fabrication." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Miss Cross." The audio played again. Maddox's voice was unmistakable, flat, confident, damning. When the clip ended, silence pressed on everyone like a held breath. A reporter's pen rolled off a desk and hit the floor with a tiny clack. Then came the whispering. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp as glass. "Mr. Maddox, do you wish to explain this recording?" Maddox's jaw worked but no sound came. Cross tried to interrupt, but her client's composure was unraveling. "It's taken out of context," he snapped. "That's not what I—" "Out of context?" The judge repeated evenly. "Were you, or were you not, referring to the fight known as Dogfight Night?" His silence was its own confession. The gavel struck once. Enough. After that, everything moved fast. Agents from the bureau stepped forward, presenting sealed files that detailed the entire operation, the drug routes, the bribes, the trafficking ring Maddox had coordinated from within the prison. Each document was a nail, and by the fifth, even Cross stopped objecting. Cameras outside caught the moment the former gang leader dropped his head into his hands. For the first time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who finally understood the cost of his own myth. The judge's voice carried over the murmuring crowd. "This court finds Rex Maddox guilty of conspiracy, coercion, and premeditated assault. Sentencing will be determined after federal review." As the bailiff cuffed Maddox, he turned toward Dante. "You think this makes you clean?" he hissed. "You'll always be one of us." Dante met his gaze, calm as ever. "You're wrong, Rex. I just learned to wait longer than you." Maddox spat on the floor before being dragged away. Cameras flashed, freezing the image forever. When the courtroom emptied, Dante remained seated, staring at the screen now black again. Carter approached from the aisle, her heels clicking softly. "It's over," she said. "He's done." "For him," Dante said. "For me, It just starts again. You did what you came for. He nodded. And the others? The men who funded him? Under investigation, she said. But you gave us the thread. Outside, the world looked too bright. The sunlight burned against his eyes like truth too long denied. Reporters shouted questions. Are you the ghost? Did you kill anyone? Was it worth it? He walked past them in silence, ignoring the microphones, the flashes, the noise. That evening, in a quiet hotel room overlooking downtown Sacramento, Pierce handed him a small box. They said this was evidence. Thought you might want it back. Dante opened it. The watch lay inside, its cracked face gleaming faintly. He turned it over in his hands. Still stopped? Pierce asked. Dante pressed his thumb against the dial. Tick. The second hand jumped once, steadying at 31. He smiled. Just barely. Not anymore. The television behind them played the news recap: Maddox's arrest, commentary from experts, pundits debating justice versus vengeance. Pierce muted it. You could have your record wiped, he said. Start over. New name? New life. Dante shook his head. Names don't matter. What you do after does. He looked out the window at the city lights blinking like distant stars. There's a gym in Oakland I used to run. Maybe I'll reopen it. You sure you want to go back there? Pierce asked. People remember. Good, Dante said. Let them. Maybe they'll remember for the right reasons this time. The next morning, he attended Maddox's transfer hearing. The man was being moved to ADX Florence, the federal supermax, to live out what remained of his sentence. When guards led him past the benches, Maddox didn't speak. He looked smaller, his shoulders slumped. The tattoos on his arms faded by fatigue. As he passed Dante, their eyes met one last time. Maddox's lips curled, not in defiance but in something like surrender. Guess you win, he muttered. Dante shook his head. No one wins here. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall, a rare softness after months of dust. Reporters ran for cover, cameras wrapped in plastic. Dante stepped into it, letting the drops bead on his suit, washing away the chalk taste of stale air. For the first time in years, he didn't flinch at the sound of thunder. It rolled across the sky like applause that didn't need an audience. He walked to the curb where Carter waited, holding an umbrella. You could at least try to stay dry, she said. Rain's honest, he replied. She smiled faintly. The Bureau could use you again. We're starting a new division, offenders turned operatives. Think about it. I've done enough pretending, he said. But if you ever need someone to teach patience, send them my way. That night, he sat alone in the small apartment the Bureau had arranged. A bed, a table, and silence. He placed the watch on the nightstand, the second hand ticking now with a soft, steady rhythm. He thought of the faces in the yard, the laughter, the shame in the older inmates' eyes, the courage in Carlos's quiet nod. He thought of the men who had watched him crawl and of the ones who had chosen to look away. Every man gets a moment, he whispered, to decide which side of the line he stands on. The city hummed below, indifferent, alive. He closed his eyes, hearing again his father's voice. Real power isn't loud, son. It's what you can hold back. He smiled at the memory, faint as the ticking of the watch. Somewhere, in a cell 5 states away, Rex Maddox sat in silence. The hum of the ventilation, the only sound. He stared at the tiny crack in the wall and thought about a man who had looked at him without hate, just truth. For the first time, he understood what losing really meant. Dante didn't need to see it. He already knew. Justice didn't always roar, it whispered, patient and inevitable, like time starting to move again. 2 years later, the gym in Oakland smelled of liniment, sweat, and something gentler, hope. The walls were painted white now, sunlight pouring through the high windows and scattering across the scuffed mats. The sign above the door read Williams Boxing and Self-Defense Academy, hand-lettered, no sponsors, no flash. Inside, a dozen teenagers worked a row of heavy bags, gloves thudding in uneven rhythm. Dante walked among them, hands behind his back, calm and steady as a metronome. He corrected a stance here, adjusted an elbow there, always quiet but firm. Balance first, he said to a boy whose punches were all speed and no form. You can't hit straight if your soul's crooked. The boy nodded, frowning in concentration. Near the far corner, an older man taped up his wrists, Carlos Mendez, now limping on a cane but smiling with the patience of someone who'd earned every scar. "You sound like a preacher," he said, voice gravelly. Dante grinned. "Just trying to keep them standing." "You ever tell them where you learned all that patience?" "No," Dante said. "They don't need my ghosts." Outside, the afternoon traffic hummed. A bus passed, leaving behind the smell of diesel and fried food from the taqueria down the block. Oakland hadn't changed much, same murals, same noise, but for Dante, it felt new. Each sound was sharper, alive. After the trial, he'd spent months rebuilding the gym, brick by brick, funded quietly by a bureau settlement he never mentioned. The neighborhood had pitched in. Old fighters, veterans, kids who needed somewhere to burn their anger. He charged nothing for lessons. The price was listening. A bell rang for the end of class. The kids pulled off their gloves, laughing, arguing about who'd hit harder. Carlos tossed Dante a towel. "You ever gonna hang your belt up there?" he asked, nodding toward the empty space above the front mirror. Dante shook his head. "Trophies make people look backward." "So what's that space for?" "Something that hasn't happened yet." Carlos laughed. "You still talk like a monk." "Maybe that's all I ever was." Later that evening, the gym emptied. Dante sat on the edge of the ring, watching the dust float in the slanted light. The cracked watch rested beside him, repaired now but still ticking with a faint irregular rhythm, as if time itself carried a limp. He turned it over in his hand. 31 seconds. Steady. A knock sounded at the door. "Doctor." Sarah Carter stood there in civilian clothes, no badge, hair loose around her shoulders. "I drove by twice before coming in," she said, smiling. "Didn't want to interrupt." "You're always welcome," Dante said. She looked around the gym. "You did it. You turned a cage into something better. Took a while. The bureau misses you. I'm sure they'll recover." She laughed softly. "We never did get to debrief properly after the trial. You vanished. Had to remember how to breathe without walls. And now? Now I teach it to others." He gestured toward the ring. "You'd be surprised how many people hold their breath all day without noticing." She nodded, quiet for a moment. "Maddox died last month." Dante looked up sharply. "Heart failure. In his sleep. They say he stopped talking months before that. Just stared at a clock on the wall. He said nothing. Only placed the watch back on the mat beside him. You don't have to feel anything," she said. "I don't," he replied. "But I'll remember him. Even monsters deserve to be remembered. If only so, we know what not to become." She studied his face, then said, "There's a new program starting rehabilitation for ex-offenders. Teaching discipline through sport. They need a director. You think I'd fit?" "I think you already started without permission." They talked until dusk turned the windows amber. When she left, Dante stayed behind, listening to the city settle into evening. A radio from the diner next door drifted through the open door, a blues song, low and steady. He began to clean the gym. Wiping bags, rolling tape, sweeping chalk. Routine was his prayer now. On the front counter sat a jar labeled Veterans Coffee Fund. He dropped a few bills inside, a habit he couldn't break. As he worked, the door creaked open again. A teenage girl stood there. Thin, shy, clutching a backpack. "You still teaching?" she asked. "Always," Dante said. "You looking to fight or learn?" "Learn," she said. "My brother, he got into trouble. Mom said maybe I should come here." He nodded toward the ring. "First rule, no fighting outside this room. Second rule, don't call me coach. Everyone here just calls me Dante." She smiled. "Okay, Dante. What's your name?" "Renee." "All right, Renee. You ready to start?" She nodded. He handed her a pair of gloves too big for her hands. "We'll fix those later," he said. "For now, just breathe." They began slowly, his voice soft but sure. The rhythm of the pads matching the old song from the radio. Each punch echoed like punctuation in a sentence only he understood. For a moment, the world shrank to timing and breath. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror, older, lines deeper, but eyes clearer. The ghost was gone, replaced by something solid. When Renee left, The streetlights were flickering on. Carlos locked up and tossed him a beer from the mini fridge. "You ever gonna rest, man?" "Maybe someday," Dante said. "Not yet. Still chasing something? Maybe just peace. You think you'll find it?" Dante looked at the door where the girl had stood, at the ring that smelled of chalk and hope. "I already did. I just have to keep earning it." That night, he walked home through the warm streets. The rain had come earlier, leaving the pavement shining. Neon from the diner sign reflected in puddles red, white, blue. He passed a group of veterans sitting outside the community center, laughing over coffee. One called out, "Hey Ghost, you still teaching the kids how to hit?" Dante smiled. "Nah. Teaching them when not to." The men chuckled. "You're doing God's work," one said. "No," Dante answered. "Just cleaning up what I left behind." At home, he placed the watch on the windowsill beside a photo of his father in uniform. The city's hum drifted through the half-open window. He wound the dial gently, and the second hand ticked forward, smooth now, unbroken. 32. He sat back. The chair creaking, eyes on the horizon where the bay shimmered under moonlight. The gulls wheeled above the docks, just shapes against the silver sky. Somewhere out there, life kept moving, indifferent and beautiful. He thought of everything that had brought him here, the cage, the fights, the silence, the long road back, and felt no bitterness. Only gratitude for the stillness between heartbeats. When dawn came, he returned to the gym early. The sun poured through the high windows, lighting the mural on the far wall. A broken chain forming the outline of a heartbeat. Beneath it, in careful brush strokes, were the words Carlos had painted months ago. "Real strength protects." Dante touched the wall lightly, as if feeling for a pulse. "Let's get to work," he whispered. The day outside was waking. Cars starting. Children shouting. The first smells of bread from the bakery next door. He took his stance in the center of the ring, breathed in for 4, held for 4, and let it go. The air filled his lungs, warm and clean. Somewhere, a clock ticked steady, forgiving, alive. Justice had never been loud. It lived in the quiet choices, in the moments no one filmed, in the simple act of standing upright when the world tried to make you crawl. Dante smiled to himself and began again.